Hello, everybody. This is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope that you are having a wonderful day today. We are going to continue on with the return of Sherlock Holmes. In today's video, we are going to cover the adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, the adventure of the Six Napoleons, and finally, the adventure of the Three Students. So, for our first story, this one is publication number 7 of the return of Sherlock Holmes. And the adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton is a satisfying story and a bit kooky in a way. We'll get to that in a minute. Sherlock is hired by a debutante by the name of Lady Eva Blackwell to retrieve some sensitive documents. Quite apparently, at one part in her life and leading up to her being engaged to be married, she wrote some letters that were maybe a little bit on the risque side. And those letters are got by Milverton, which is described by Sherlock as one of the worst of the worst. He is the trash, he is the bad person that waits until somebody has done something wrong, is in the worst possible spot they could be in, and then he just does nothing but fatten his own pocketbook by extorting money from them. And if they could catch him blackmailing somebody innocent, they would put him away. Milverton is demanding a whopping £7,000. Which in today's markets would be close to 800,000. Holmes quickly sets up a meeting with Milverton, and Milverton's like, oh, well, I'm going to be sensitive about this. Does this other person that's with you have any clue as to what's going on? And is he a secretive person? Can we even talk about this around him? Of course, Sherlock tells Milverton, yes, he's good. He already knows. Let's get down to it. What you're asking is a whole lot. And even just £2,000 would be such a strain on the lady. And she could make it happen, but it's just what you're asking is no, she can't do it. Milverton immediately says, well, I'm out. Peace. Have a good day. I'm just going to go ahead and send these on to the Earl that she's going to marry. And Sherlock calms down Milverton just a smidge to get him to set back down. And upon discussing what's really going on here, Milverton is planning to make Lady Eva an example so that other people would be more understanding and more open to discussions on if they should pay or not. Now, immediately, they spring a trap upon Milverton, and he sideskirts them and pulls a gun and says, I expected somebody of your caliber to be a little bit more original in trying to get this notebook from me. Paraphrase, but that's kind of the way that it goes. I'm out. So upon Milverton leaving, Sherlock comes up with a plan and actually incites Watson to do something that would be on the other side of the law for a change. Ooh. Sherlock swears he will get those papers at whatever cost. And Sherlock drags Watson along for the ride, and Watson has some very odd feelings about being on the other side of the law for a change. Now, in the meantime, Holmes starts disguising himself as a plumber, and he starts disappearing for long periods of time, and eventually, Sherlock comes back and meets up with Watson and says, okay, look, that's done, that's over with, and I'm engaged to be married. And Watson's like, hey, congratulations. Woo. And Sherlock's, no. You know Milverton's maid? Well, I'm engaged to be married to her. Watson, I can imagine at that point, would have given him that shifty-eyed look of, yeah. And Sherlock goes on to explain that, no, I'm a plumber, and I have a very successful business. I have her attentions, but there happens to be another gentleman that will cut me out of the loop altogether if I turn my back too long. Apparently, the lady's feelings and heart wouldn't be broken or hurt with Sherlock's plan in place. But what he did gain was knowledge of the house that Milverton lived in, and of scheduling. And upon that fateful day, Sherlock and Watson do indeed break into Milverton's house and get into his study. Once inside of the study, Sherlock starts to work on the safe, gets it cracked, but as he cracks it and starts to open it, Milverton happens to walk in and they both scurry out of the way and hide. Now we find out, quite to surprise, that Milverton has a midnight rendezvous with a maidservant that is offering to sell some damning letters and is inquiring about how much she will get paid. Now this woman is not to be confused with our Lady Eva. This is somebody else, because things have already happened. During the interview, she pulls away her mask and says, it is I. Take this and that and that and this, and empties a gun into Milverton, killing him pretty much there on the spot. She was quite upset because she told him, even though she had begged and pleaded with him not to go through with it and not to send the information, the blackmail that he had on her to her existing husband, he did it anyway, laughing the whole time, and that he would never do this again. And I think that she ground her foot into his face as well, and then takes off. Well, at that point, Watson and Sherlock both spring into action, Sherlock on the most part, because he grabs up all the paperwork in the safe and throws it into the fire, and then gets the blood-spattered papers that was underneath him, throwing those in the fire too, hopefully saving Lady Eva. It is now time to escape, and Sherlock and Watson just barely make it. Watson's foot gets caught as he's trying to jump over something, but he kicks free. Later on, Sherlock gets a visit from the police, and yes, it is our favorite detective, or my favorite detective, one peacock, Inspector Lestrade. And of course, he's asking Sherlock and Watson both for help in solving this ludicrous thing. But he thinks he's already got people arrested that were actually in there robbing them. However, this time around, Sherlock does absolutely nothing to help Lestrade, and in fact doesn't clear up any of the matter whatsoever, keeping it to himself, and laughs everything off by saying, well, the descriptions that you've given very well could fit Watson over here, for the love of God, man. And this short story closes with Sherlock saying something to the effect of, sometimes a crime can be committed that is so heinous that the victims themselves will become criminals and exact their own revenge, and I will not help you with this case. And just a short time later, after Lestrade leaves, Watson and Sherlock are out and about among the streets. Sherlock comes across a picture of the face of the lady that killed Milverton. When Watson sees what Sherlock has pointed out and recognizes them, Sherlock puts his finger to his lips and cut to black. This was a good story. I enjoyed it a lot. It was a little bit different from most of the others that I've read for just a couple of things. This time Sherlock wasn't working with the police, and I felt like this was more of an honest story because Sherlock's way usually, although he does do everything he can to aid whenever aid needs to be given to the police, this was certainly one of those things where it would fall in his morality gray land. And I really don't think that if cases like this were to come across to him very often, that he would be helping the police at all. And in fact, would probably be more of a hero's champion, a Robin Hood of sorts, instead of copiously helping the London police or whatever yard happens to be closest to him in solving the murders of individuals or the mishappenings of other people. And so that wraps us up on the first one we're taking care of today. Now let's move on to the second. Second story today will be The Adventure of the Six Napoleons. And I would be curious to see what everybody thinks about this in that description. If you read this, tell me if you think it's filler material. I know that in series and TV, there's always those episodes that it's like, why is that even here? I mean, yeah, sure, it's got all the same characters and kind of the same plot lines, but there's really no reason for this to be here. And that's kind of the feeling I had while I was reading this one. Not that it was short on any kind of detail or that I felt like it was misplaced, but it really didn't seem to be the style of something that Sherlock would get wrapped into. In my opinion. What's yours? So, for the second time today, we will talk about the Peacock, Inspector Lestrade. He shows up speaking to Sherlock about this problem he's got with these Napoleon busts that keep getting shattered. And there's a brief description between Watson, Sherlock, and Lestrade whenever it comes to different type of psychological type things, why somebody would be doing such a small destruction anyway. But then it's mentioned that there's been a murder, and I'm pretty sure it is at that point where Sherlock starts to realize that Lestrade's theory of the Napoleon-hating man that only destroys busts of Napoleons is probably slightly askew and inaccurate. At that point, there had already been 3 busts that had been destroyed by this Napoleon-hating lunatic. One was at a doctor's house and at his practice, and another was inside of Morse Hudson's shop. And it is at this point, when the 4th bust gets busted, that somebody is actually murdered, and now it has the attention of Sherlock. He's like, oh, instead of blowing you off, all right, let's go check this out. This happened pretty well on the doorstep of a Mr. Horace Harker. Apparently, he had heard a noise and went to investigate. When he did, he found a dead body on his doorstep. And this guy is a very nervous journalist. He goes on quite fervently about this, that, and the other that happened, and he just was so faint with fear or whatnot that he couldn't pick up his pen and write the story for his paper. And inside of the dead gentleman's pocket is a picture of a very odd-looking individual. Now, the fragments of the bust that was broken was found up the street a little bit in front of an empty house. Here is where Sherlock starts to put some little things together, such as at one place a bust was broken inside, at another place it was broken outside, and here, instead of it being broken inside, it was also broke outside. But there was one common denominator between all the ones that were broke. They were broken where there would be light, so the individual that was breaking them could find something. But before moving on, Holmes does tell Inspector Lestrade to tell Mr. Harker that yes, indeed, it was a lunatic, and go ahead and write your article for the paper to get the guy motivated, of course, even though he doesn't feel like that's actually what's going on here. Sherlock indeed tracks down a couple of shopkeepers that were selling these busts and finds out the dates and the times, and then puts two and two together, finding out where this was manufactured at. He does ask one of the shopkeepers about it and finds that this person that is kind of odd looking in the picture was Beppo, an Italian man. And he had gotten in trouble and went away for a little while and was just released. Go figure. To find out if these busts were all made at the same time or part of the same batch, Sherlock and Watson go down to visit Gelder & Co. and confirms his suspicions. He talks to one of the managers and finds that that manager was aware of Beppo and describes him as pretty much as being a hooligan that got in a bunch of trouble. Now, later on that evening, it is found, whenever Lestrade sends information to Sherlock, that the gentleman that was dead on the doorstep of Harker was actually a member of the mafioso. So why would the mafia be after Beppo? And this is where we get to use the express mail system. I wish that our mail was half as fast and half as good as the express system that they had back then, because it never failed him. But he sends off an express message and meets up with Watson and with Inspector Lestrade outside of a house in Chaswick. Because quite apparently, it appears that Sherlock Holmes is expecting another bust breaking by this egomaniacal hater of Napoleon. But even though Lestrade is quite fed up with Sherlock Holmes' preoccupation with the bust now, he shows up anyway, as does Watson. And while waiting outside of this house, Beppo actually does show up, breaks in, pulls another bust out, and shatters it, finding nothing. But they spring on the man and arrest him. And this is where Sherlock gets to be a bit of a peacock himself in front of Lestrade, because he had made a deal with the last owner of the busts that were made on that particular day when Beppo was arrested. And whenever he purchases this thing for £10, which the guy that was selling it says, whoa, no, that's too much. I only paid this much for it. And Sherlock was like, no, it's fine, trust me. So Sherlock makes the gentleman sign a piece of paper saying that he transfers all rights and anything that has to do with this item to Sherlock upon taking the money, which of course he does. And shortly upon that gentleman leaving, in front of Watson, so after the sailor leaves, Sherlock picks up the bust very promptly and smashes it on the floor, searching through it and finding a black pearl attached to a piece of the bust that had shattered. Sherlock goes on to explain that this is the infamous Black Pearl of the Borgias, and that the reason why all these things were being smashed, no, Beppo wasn't actually a maniacal individual that was psychologically deranged and felt the need to smash every Napoleon statue he ever came across. Instead, what was going on was the day that Beppo got arrested, he had come into possession of the Black Pearl of the Borgias and had hidden it, as he was a skilled laborer, inside of one of the busts, and he knew that there was exactly 6 of them and was able to track them down. And how did he come across such a pearl to begin with? Well, the man that was dead on the footsteps of Mr. Harker was the brother of the lady that was the maid for the house that had the Black Pearl of the Borgias in their possession. So, 1 year after Beppo getting out, he decided to start smashing all the busts so he could find the very valuable pearl that he had hidden inside. And this finishes the second story that we're going to talk about today, moving on to the third and final one for this video. And today, the last one will be The Adventure of the Three Students. Sherlock and Watson find themselves in the town of a university when they receive a letter asking them to come check things out. A one Mr. Hilton Scombs of St. Luke's College. And the problem is the good man, the lecturer, Mr. Scombs, had been working on a proof for an exam when he had to leave his office. And whenever he left and came back, he found that his butler had accidentally left the key and somebody had been in and the papers were scattered all over. And he had no clue who could have been doing it. The scholarship will be between 3 individuals, possibly, and one of them might have been the suspect. The servant that left the key in the door, his name was Bannister, and upon Sherlock and Watson showing up and starting to ask questions, he's absolutely exhausted, so he falls exhaustedly into a chair. However, even though he's sitting there and exhausted, he swears he did not touch the papers. Upon inspecting where things were being wrote, it was clear that because of the soft wood, that the exam had been at least partially copied, and somebody was probably going to ace the thing. Other inspections turned up a few other clues, such as pencil shavings, a broken pencil lead, and a fresh cut in the desk surface, as well as a small amount of black clay with some white speckling in it. And since this is a sizable scholarship that will be awarded to the person that passes the exam, Scombs wants to make sure that the cheater doesn't win this time. The main problem that Scombs has is the 3 students that are going to be taking this test to get the exam live above him, so it really could have been any of them. And unfortunately, the first suspect, or student, Gilcrest, is a very athletic individual. He is known for his long jump and is very, as I mentioned, athletic. And that person is very capable, very industrious, very quick on his feet whenever it comes to the thought. The second individual, Doyle Ross, is more of a colder, calculating individual that doesn't take many chances. And the third is a one Miles McLaren, which seems to be on the up and up mentally and emotionally, but he has a problem with gambling and with taking chances he probably shouldn't take. After asking questions about the papers, where they were originally located, Holmes deduces that the papers were took one by one over to the windowsill, and whoever was copying the exam did it there so that he could watch for Soames and so that he could see when the professor was coming back to the office. But unfortunately, the professor did not come back in the usual way and instead used a side door. At this point, Sherlock finds out that the side door indeed goes to Soames' bedroom, and while examining the bedroom area and going towards it, he finds another little blob of clay and a scratch that was on the door. He questions people, he asks questions, he finds things out, and they depart. Upon returning the next day, Sherlock Holmes is very sure that Bannister, the butler, is not necessarily being up forth and upright, asking, "Why did you collapse in that seat?" Sherlock also figures out, after inspecting the clay and going to the athletics area and looking at the long jump area, that the black dirt and the sawdust that makes up the little pieces of clay that was found matches up with the long jump area. And that was whenever he pieced everything together. So he figured out indeed it was student number 1, contestant number 1, known as Gilcrest, that was the perpetrator of the copied exam. And the whole time that Professor Soames was in his bedroom, Gilcrest was in there too, hiding behind a curtain. And on the previous day, as Soames was really getting into Bannister about being lazy and leaving a key behind that he should have never done, Gilcrest happened to be in Soames' bedroom still and heard everything that happened. So with his height, he would be probably the only person that could see through the windowsill to see where the professor's proofs were indeed setting. Also, as previously mentioned, the little pieces of clay that were found, and then also he had intimate knowledge about jumping shoes somehow, that they had claws or spikes at one side of the shoe but not at the other, so that whoever jumps doesn't necessarily fall flat on their face when they skid across the dirt when they land. Upon Gilcrest being called in, he confronts Bannister almost immediately about his treachery, and come to find out, apparently Bannister had at one point been Gilchrest's father's butler. The rest of the evidence had to do with the gloves that Bannister had been sitting upon when Sherlock and Watson had initially investigated and looked for clues in the room. Now, to give Gilcrest a little bit of credit here, before this intervening moment with Sherlock and Watson explaining the evidence to Soames, he had already took it upon himself to write a letter saying that he did not want to set in the exam and instead was going to go to Africa to be in a police force. And it was all due to a conversation that he had had with Bannister previously. And that does it. Congratulations if you are still here. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have made it this far, you're more than just a mere mortal. You are in fact awesome and incredible. Thank you so much for watching. Today's stories were publications that can be found easily enough in The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which was wrote by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. If you happen to be new here, we would love to have you join our family. Go ahead and find that subscribe button. Should be down here somewhere. Click on it, and when you click on it, please don't forget about the notifications, because with YouTube these days, you gotta do 2 things to find out when the next video is going to come out. If you saw anything in here that you found interesting, don't forget to give it that thumbs up and send it to somebody that you think might enjoy it. Again, I would like to thank you for watching. My name is Shane with Shane's Books and Review, and I'll see you in the next video.